All right. Next up, we are ready for our next speaker. And I'd like to welcome Raihan to talk about DAOs culture and marketing. So from FWB, please welcome Raihan. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Things are going great. How are you?
Amazing, doing all right.
Awesome. I'll let you take over from here and excited to hear the talk.
For sure. So my talk's going to be kind of just all about a couple different things that I've been thinking about lately. And primarily, I've really been considering what it means for DAOs to really consider community building from a marketing standpoint, as well as from a decision-making standpoint. And a lot of, similar to the previous speaker, I really want to talk about kind of who we are at FWB, how we make decisions, and how a lot of our decision-making processes have bifurcated as a result of the DAO structure. Initially, we were just a group chat, where it's just me and maybe about 20 of us chatting, joking about crypto. And at some point, people started seeing the growth of the community saying, hey, how can I help? What can I do? So, we call ourselves a cultural membership. A lot of amazing Web3 artists, thinkers, really considerate folks. And we really use on-chain metrics of holding the token as a means of joining events, but also submitting your own ideas, your own creativity, and finding people to work on projects alongside you. So, some of our larger success stories have been folks like Eric who is a phenomenal designer, ex-Nike, a few other things. And, he was like, I have no idea how on-chain art works. Can I find folks to really take my creative practice and make it on-chain? And within, I want to say, a 3-month time span, he spun up an amazing project called Monarchs that was 888 procedurally generated butterflies in his very own unique style. And he found all his coding and dev help that way. And as part of that mint process, he actually gave, I believe, 5% of the mint back to FWB as a DAO. So we're always thinking about kind of what does it mean to take opportunities externally, share those within the community for FWB, and then share those within the wider Web3 community at large, mostly because so much of what we do is, we're hot, as I say, and we want to share that with everyone because all of us kind of are in this together. That, on my end, the one other thing I really like talking about is the fact that, like, a lot of people ask me, oh, how do I get involved in Web3? And for me, a little bit bragging, why not? But also a little bit kind of sharing how a bunch of experiences have led up to really building a community. A lot of folks are kind of Web3 centric for the sake of being in Web3. And I think that that is a little bit of a missed opportunity for so many folks. My little tweet on the right where it's just like vibes are kind of king, because we don't want to look solely at someone's resume, someone's experience, and say, this is who you are. So even for a lot of on-chain credentialing, the question of, who are you is fascinating. Because in my end, just bullet by bullet, I recently finished my MBA at USC. That gives me this weird strategy, macro, how to talk to suits strategy on, previous professional lives. I've been a coffee geek, which is, worked in retail, worked in kind of e-commerce strategy. And that's been a lot of soft skills. In fact, for anyone who wants to work in DAOs, that might be the best thing, which is like, go work a retail job for a little bit if you haven't. I recommend it. Run your own business, deal with people who are cranky and tired and exhausted and like, oh, I can't talk till I've had my coffee, because then you will get really good at DAO governance and people wondering why you don't have a roadmap and all of that. From there, a record label operator, the business of soft skills, really thinking about P&Ls, thinking about how creative can be operationalized and utilized in a way that you haven't thought of before, right? So oftentimes for so many people who are saying, oh, if we just do a Twitter space, people will come. Well, so what? If you're an artist and you put out a TikTok or something, what does that mean for your sales? What does that mean for touring? And how can we take that back to DAOs, right? In addition to that, I own a crystal shop and fragrance shop with my mom, which again, if you haven't worked with your folks, also another cool learning experience. But also that's in the middle of Skid Row in downtown. And one thing that's fascinating there is just thinking about the socioeconomics of running a business and how, on the one hand, you might have people who are really into chakras and going to Erewhon and spending $20 on a juice. And on the other hand, you have people who are, unhoused, who are saying, hey, can I get this for free? Can I take this? Whatever. And you have to balance a lot of that. I've had a lot of large conversations with even, Fortune 50 companies where they're like, we launched the NFT and, you have people who really want to build community, but you also have people who are mad at us because the product isn't pumping. And, there isn't really a playbook for that other than going out and being in the world. And I guess the last thing is like, I will plug my Twitter where I'm at Raihan_. And this is actually kind of a huge one for anyone who is on this call. Obviously, you spend time on crypto Twitter, but you also might be in 100 to 200 Discords or something. And it's really fascinating to think about Discord as kind of the coordination model for DAOs and how oftentimes that isn't where the real work happens. A lot of it is still, as decentralized as we want to be, it's still one-to-one and seeing, where are the coordinated kind of groupthink conversations happening? But then outside of that, where are kind of your external flyaways for thinking? That who are the quiet folks who may not want to necessarily put themselves out there? And then how do you tease that out of them? Oftentimes we see a lot of projects, even at FWB, we have new member hangs. I've seen people like Rainbow do office hours, ENS, shout out to Alicia, doing office hours for people who may have questions and are kind of too afraid to ask. And again, powerful soft skills, superpower there in terms of coordination and really building and getting outsiders into your system. And that kind of leads into kind of the crux of something I've been thinking about for a while lately, which is it feels that a lot of DAOs do not think about community management as internal versus external processes. And this is really what I want to stress on here today. That what does it mean for internal community management to empower folks to go from being tourists in your DAO to being elected officials, right? And how does that contrast with external? That when we really want to define the idea of kind of tourism in a DAO or in a Discord, it's people checking out your Twitter or checking your IG or even reading a pitch deck saying, hey, so what do you do? What's interesting? How much of this is fun in games, right? Whether it's like FWB Fest, which was a 3-day extravaganza in Idlewild outside of LA. We had, James Blake, Waste Blood, JPEG Mafia. It was huge, all funded and paid for by the DAO, all attended by DAO members. Or even small things like a weekly coffee time chat or wallet safety courses, etc. That's the internal pulse. That how do we make sure that people are kind of understood, heard, and that their wishes are actioned upon in a way that's directional for the DAO. So if we go back again real quick, I'm sorry, a little all over the place, that to the idea of FWB being a cultural membership, you got to think about the membership desk, right? And some of that is always going to be a very kind of functional bureaucratic role, right? If you lose your library card, YMCA card, you don't want to go to someone who is necessarily, how do you say, financialized to help you all the time, right? They might just be a bureaucrat, right? They're just someone who's like, this is my job. My job is to make sure you're good, right? So that is that first touch point of getting someone into the community, making sure that their credentials and everything are taken care of, and that from there, they are best served in how to make the best use of your DAO. Because every DAO is going to have a variety of different touch points of participation. Everyone can attend, not everyone wants to participate. Even for Fest, we saw the same thing. A lot of folks who joyfully and excitedly bought tickets were like, this is the best experience I've had. I never want to touch Snapshot. I never want to vote. I trust you guys. And that's super special and super interesting for us and for, I think, a lot of DAOs moving forward as well, that you're going to see a lot of bifurcation between what the core team does, what the core team acts on, and then what the wider community wants to work on. And I think a lot of that is that second bullet point of really building those rails for participation. In the next slide, I will show you guys kind of the overview, a little older, but an older overview of how our DAO is organized. But the one thing I want to highlight here is that you're always going to have rails for participation, whether that is someone understanding that work in a DAO could just be hanging out in Discord, hanging out on Twitter, spreading the good word, creating memes, shit posting, whatever. Or it could be, folks like Emerson Kirk in our DAO, who is really thinking about governance structures. What does it mean for us to have soft votes versus hard votes on chain, on Snapshot? What does it mean for us to create new Snapshot strategies? What does it mean for us to build out kind of DAO treasury management, whether that's, AJ at Consensus or a few other folks, and saying, what does it mean for us to thrive, not just season to season, but year to year and beyond? How much of this is our mandate? And all of that I just said contrasts so heavily with this idea of external community management, where you might be having folks whose sole mandate is like, I want to spend time in Discord. I want to see how it changes message to message. I want to see how it changes day to day, hour to hour. And then I want to float outside of that. I want to spend time on Twitter or Reddit or, in the wider art world, etc. Because again, all of those experiences are so fundamentally valid for the way a DAO can and should work. And one way that we've seen that kind of manifest itself is really checking the community pulse for kind of key issues with Snapshot. We have a team member, Drew Kaufman, who's kind of our NFT general. Shout out to Drew. And he spends so much time trawling Twitter, other Discords, other projects, and seeing what the best practices are, what the best questions are, and where kind of there are points of friction for potential governance processes, as before we commit something to Snapshot. So for every process that we have, or every Snapshot vote that we have about a 2-week kind of pre-vote system where people chat out ideas, discuss pros, discuss cons, and really get stuff going in a way that feels healthy for them. And only when it is good to go and approved by a governance committee do we have a third party who's saying, okay, we've reviewed this, this is agreed upon by the community, now it goes up to vote. And even post-vote, right? Is this a token weighted vote? Is this something where whales can come in, change the outcome? Or is it somewhere, it's one person, one vote, we're very strict about it. And that's so interesting to kind of think about which votes are your soft votes, which votes are your medium votes, which votes are like changing the future of the DAO. And then that gets into kind of our structure, right? So I've mentioned all of the whys, and now this is kind of the how of it. That structurally speaking, I would say FWE is kind of riding the line between traditional corporation and this new format of a DAO. That we have editorial, product, well, actually I'll go clockwise. We have product, we have editorial, we have marketing and comms, partnerships, events, cities, and membership. And then at the core, we have ops. And all of the kind of external facing, the outside rim of the circle, if you will, are the ones that are dealing with the wider Web3 world and figuring out how do we best kind of interface, whether it is building products for ourselves, like our gatekeeper ticketing app, member directory for our members. How do we build out editorial, which is kind of highlighting the best of Web3 and how that interfaces with kind of non-crypto worlds, whether that is in government, in food service, in, politics in the fine art world, or even highlighting NFT projects from established artists. Marketing and comms is like a very valuable one where, again, you have folks who focus solely on internal marketing and comms, and you have people who are looking at the wider outside world of how does it look on socials? How does it look when we get press? You know, what is our goal for this? You know, similar to a previous speaker, I think a lot of our goal is not kind of growth at all costs. We're not a hyper growth kind of concern. We really want to think that for each project, each minute, how are we uplifting community members? And then how are those community members having the permission to uplift FWB as a DAO? It's really a two-way street that doesn't just start with someone holding a token. It really starts with someone saying, I see you, I hear you, I get what you're about, and this is how I want to help. You know, one great example actually is with Joy Howard, who runs a company called Early Majority. And Joy actually came to our marketing and comms team and said, hey, I have a clothing company called Early Majority. I would love to do a badge like on clothing for FWB and do it around the time of FWB Fest. How can we best kind of promote this both as an NFT on the digital side? How can we promote it as a story for works in progress? And then how can we offer this to the wider community and kind of show Early Majority as a leader in the space, as a creator of best practices for kind of the interface of Web3 and traditional kind of clothing, and go from there. You know, that also touches into the next category of partnerships, where partnerships almost, I would say 100% of the time, come from within our community. These are folks who are, again, interested in helping us and also, you know, helping themselves, right? You know, the idea of, this is my phone, squad wealth doesn't just come from nowhere, that we understand that people are in this to enrich themselves and enrich like the wider community, but that folks are stronger together. So oftentimes partnerships can come in a variety of different ways. The Web2 way of thinking of partnerships is like, how can we extract money out of folks? You know, how can we make sure that we get in-kind support or like a fat check? And for us, it's been really inspiring to think about it the other way around, which is, oh, how can these partners best help us? And sometimes it's true, like if you're an emerging DAO, if you're just starting out, you're wondering, all right, what does it mean for us to look at runway? What does it mean for us to look at a burn rate? And how can we help kind of, how can external partners help us ameliorate that? And that may not always be the case. I've always learned, sometimes the hard way, that slower is better in a lot of different ways, and kind of finding the story and the communications between the partnerships and the marketing end is the hard stuff. How do we sell this again internally? And then how do we make this hit externally? That if you go and check out, oh, I wish I put this in the slides, that our partnership with Taika, where Taika is a beverage company based in San Francisco. And they were like, we want to work with a DAO and basically have all, you know, 1,000+ of you help us make a beverage together. And we decided on like a sparkling latte. We helped them build out the site, build out the smart contract infrastructure, and do so in a way that was honoring their product and honoring the product's values towards the community. That there's so much of thinking about that back and forth. Beyond that, you know, events in cities are probably the closest thing that most people are familiar with DAOs, where if you have like a ETH Global conference, shout out to ETH Global, that how do we best get involved? If you're doing something at the city's level, how can we apply for either a light key, which is just the FW branding in name, or how can we apply for an event key, which is something more tangible? You get funding from the DAO to like book a venue or spend it as you will. You submit a P&L to us and we say, all right, this worked, this is great, you can keep it going. Or, hey, this is room for improvement, we're going to bump you down to a light key, right? And all of that actually feeds into the last one, which is membership, right? That membership is such a core kind of KPI, for lack of a better term, for a DAO like ours, where we kind of live and die by the fact that like, we want amazing people joining us. We want to make sure that, excuse me, that folks who are joining us by purchasing the token are treated well, but also that we're able to kind of go into the fog of war, if you will, and find the people doing the craziest, most interesting stuff in Web3 and get them involved with, fellowships, grants. We did a garage grants program recently where we had, I think, 200 or 300 folks apply. And it was everything from mango tastings in Miami to creating a digital event streaming platform that was token gated for artists in Southeast Asia. And that was kind of like an aha, very beautiful moment where all of a sudden we're really putting the decentralized in DAO. That for something that is so kind of Eurocentric, US-centric, we all of a sudden saw a ton of influence and energy from folks who are like, I'm not awake when you guys are. How do we best get involved? And that was really a combination of membership working with events and cities to make sure this was hitting as well as it did. And, all of that kind of is the periphery, and then ops is kind of thinking about the long term. This is the working with other DAOs, working with other events, working with other strategists and seeing like, all right, what do we think this looks like in a season? What do we think this looks like in a year, et cetera? And how can we kind of address blockers or issues? And the ops roles are all kind of, truth be told, a little more bureaucratic. They are a little more, buttoned up by the numbers and thinking about the harder, more tangible goals of a DAO. And all of that kind of is a back and forth that I think a lot of folks don't discuss, which is how much of this is internal facing, how much of it is external facing, how much is sales, how much of it is like marketing to your people and marketing to others. I think for us in FWB, I always kind of am the anti-marketer, where I joke that like, we're the anti-crypto club. We're the folks who are like, we don't really care about crypto. We think about it mostly as a tool. And by treating it as a vessel, we've allowed folks creativity and their own kind of energy to shine through in a very beautiful way. I think that is actually what I have so far, Kartik. I mean, can we open this up? Actually, there's a little more that, just real quick, I want to end it here that like our communities everywhere from kind of, high big tech folks like Ev Williams from Twitter, all the way to Jeff Carvalho at High Snobiety. If anyone's a sneaker person, you know who Jeff is, to, DJs like Richie Hodden, who basically invented techno, to folks like Eric Hu, again, that awesome designer I mentioned earlier. And across the board, one thing that I've been thinking about as I look at this list of members is how do we kind of create the best interfaces for these folks to have vessels for their creativity, and then have that kind of feedback into FWB as a DAO. So when we do an event in New York or something around Art Basel in Miami, that who can we tap into and who's raising their hands, but then also who do we kind of want to pick and choose from? So with, for example, FWB Fest, we were able to have talks with Ezra Miller and Eric Hu and artists like Khalik Mal back to back. We had Melton Demirs, who's talking about cults in Web3, which is such a great phrasing that is past the weeds of being in a smart contract. It's really allowing folks to kind of stretch out their minds and think of like, what's next? Where do we go from here? And, thankfully it was a success and we're going to do more of it moving forward. And that is what I got so far.
That was absolutely incredible. I personally learned so much that I kind of want to rewind this after this whole thing ends and just kind of go through that again. So I think there's like my kind of synthesis of this is that there's a lot of super interesting things that you brought up, and so much of that is directly visible as you kind of look at how FWB works as a community and kind of how thoughtful you are in kind of executing kind of next kind of anywhere from events to seasons to just what you kind of broadcast on, even on products. My kind of reverse question to you would be, how do you make this more prescriptive to others so they can shamelessly steal and also improve what they're doing? And then how do we do that? And how do we make that a lot more easy to, replicate? And what would your advice be there for those communities?
Heck yeah, of course. I think one thing right off the bat that I love is I always tell people to build selfishly, like build for yourselves, build for your DAO. Think about it almost like a brand, or actually not a brand, like a band almost. Like you're jamming with your friends and you're building for needs that you have. So even Gatekeeper or Works in Progress or any of our kind of cities events were stuff that we did for ourselves initially. We really didn't have how do you say, a mandate to like, oh, you have to do this.
Well, you also were the first ones to figure it out. So you kind of had a different premise too, because I remember FWB as a community has been out for a few years and there weren't anybody to copy from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really fun and interesting for us because, I highlighted my background and the same thing for all the folks I work with, that all of us came from very disparate backgrounds. I think maybe it took us 5 or 6 months to get the first person who's like a hardcore Solidity nerd in FWB, right? They were like, and they came in because they were interested in music and art and all this other stuff, right? So I think lesson one that's huge is like build selfishly and see where you can build together. That's so much of our work, even for stuff like Gatekeeper. We go back and forth with the folks from Token Proof. We go back and forth with, so many other folks for building kind of on-chain identity solutions. We want to think which of this is applicable for us, which is applicable at the wider level. And as we kind of grow and scale, how much of this can be open source for the greater good, right? And again, I think some of that's going to be that external community management role, Kartik, where you're just out there, outside, and seeing what other people are doing outside your bubble, right? And how you can best rope people in. Because other than that, like you're going to have 20 to 25 people who DM me every week are like, yeah, we're building DAO tooling. And it's like, that's cool, but like, to what end? Right? That how can you build DAO tooling if you're not in a DAO? How can you think that, okay, I'm building, I don't know, Web3 Salesforce, right? If you haven't really seen how, 10 or 15 DAOs work, and that's something that's always super fun, whether I'm talking like Jess from Seed Club or Marty at Pool Suite, you name it, right? That we have so many kind of shared goals in building it out. So I think that's kind of the huge actionable thing, which is A, just because something's done already doesn't mean you can't do it better, but B, just because it's done doesn't mean or just because you don't see it doesn't mean it hasn't been done yet. So like do a little bit of research and kind of dig and put your own spin on it.
No, that's great advice. And maybe one, so the same question, but from a different lens, which is general kind of thinking around how should they structure decision-making and kind of actually on the leadership side, how do we actually make that scalable, or not even just scalable, but effective in decision-making? How do you think about that?
Totally. So, a master's in public policy, which is kind of geeky. And I think about that a lot. Like, what does it mean for someone, again, that I mentioned this on the talk, that what does it mean for someone to go from a tourist to a citizen to elected official to like the upper echelons of that, right? And hey, citizens make decisions too. You don't have to be an elected official to do that. The way that the roads in a DAO work are equally as valuable for you as someone who's in that core team. And I think this is actually the message I always give to core team members, which is I really behoove all of us who are in that kind of upper echelon to think about how do I decentralize and how do I make sure that I'm really going with the will of the populace, not necessarily thinking about like the bubble, and fight for your ideas, right? If you're really like, oh no, this snapshot has to work this way, get out there, have a town hall, be in conversation with folks, and encourage your haters to be very vocal and loud and deal with it, right? This is kind of the thing that differentiates DAOs from C Corps and traditional corps anyways, right? That you have to be able to roll with a company that has the energy of like an old school message board.
Yeah, and sometimes there are good critics, right? Like, so you get to actually have a voice.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. That's so special, right? That we, and I think the way we kind of operationalize that, to answer your question, is some of these are soft votes on even Twitter or Discord, right? Like a yes or no, react with this emoji. Some of them are going to be a little harder. Again, we have a whole governance forum in Discord where people argue about stuff and like really bring their best selves to it in good faith. And then we have that final snapshot, which is bam, it's on chain. We see what you did. And then for us, as we move forward, that's going to codify on the member directory as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this amazing talk. And as a request from us, if you can share the slides with us, we'll make them public. but they'll be appreciated. And thanks again. This was
For
great.
sure. Thank you so much. I'll clean them up and then we'll take it from there.